So I'm still on a journey to find another job. I was working as a freelance artist and designer. That whole business basically fell apart. I was working as a tattoo artist before that due to COVID and other things that kind of fell apart. And I decided that even though I'm one of the world's most neurotic men, like I'm in the 98th percentile of the neuroticism scale on the Big Five personality psychological model, I for some reason thought, you know what? I'm going to work in a prison. So I applied for a job. It was to be an art teacher within a local prison. I say local, it's about 45 to 55 minutes drive from where I live. And as soon as I applied for it, I kind of regretted it instantly because I just thought, what am I going to do in a prison? I'm, super anxious, super stress sensitive. How am I going to handle myself, in an environment with people who are basically the opposite to me? Because when you think about criminals, when you think about the sort of people that are in prison, certainly the people that are in prison for a long time, and a lot of the local prisoners would have been in there for maybe like 5 years, 10 years, they would have committed, pretty horrific crimes, like murders, assaults. And this isn't just, your sort of petty theft and a little bit of tax evasion or something type of thing. Like when you think of those types of personalities, one thing they probably all have in common, they're going to be messed up. That I suppose you can't really categorise all prisoners in the same way, but they're generally going to be quite disagreeable and low neuroticism people. Because I think if you're generally quite a scared, neurotic, anxious person, someone who doesn't really take risks because you're too concerned, too worried to do that kind of shit. Like I think you're the sort of person that's gonna, if you're the worrier, your default way of dealing with difficult situations is going to be to kind of withdraw, whereas the opposite of that is going to be people that are going to push forward and, basically take risks and potentially cause conflict in their life, things like that. Yeah, I don't know, I just feel like generally the crowd wouldn't be my audience. But for some reason I applied for this job anyway. It turned out I ended up getting a job interview, and I actually went to that job interview, and I just want to talk a little bit about it. And there was another job interview I went for recently, and I'm going to talk about that as well. So job interviews, what's it like these days to do a job interview? I mean, well, I don't know, because the job interviews that I'm doing or have done recently, I guess are a bit niche. It's in the art and design space, and I suppose the way that that's going to be conducted is going to be very different compared to if you're, going for a job as an accountant or working in an office, or, every interview I guess is going to be different. But it was weird, just taking it from the top. So I drove to this prison, and it had been about 15 years since I had an official job interview. I did get a job a couple of months ago, a little part-time job delivering pizzas, but that wasn't really an interview. That was just turn up and have a chat and talk about when you can start type of thing. There wasn't really, there was no questioning as to can you do the job or not. The whole idea was just to take you on board and then give you a couple of hours of training, and then you just get on with it. But it's a fairly easy job, so it didn't need, I didn't need a degree or 10 years of experience to be able to deliver pizzas for a living, or at least part-time. So that was that. But yeah, other than that, it's been I'd say about 15 years since I last had a proper job interview. So it was pretty scary. I was pretty nervous, and I tried to sort of prepare for it, because they said the interview is going to be split up into a couple of parts. The first part, general interview questions. The next part is going to be a teaching exercise. Now, okay, I know some stuff about art, I know some stuff about design, but that's from being an artist and designer, designing stuff for people. I'm not a teacher. I think teaching is a very different skill. Being in front of a person or people is much, is a lot different to, just sitting in front of a computer, pushing pixels around the screen, or sitting in front of a canvas, pushing paint around a canvas. So I wasn't really prepared. I don't have a teaching qualification, a teaching degree. I have done a little bit of one-to-one teaching in the past, but God, I did maybe 3 or 4 lessons teaching like someone in their 60s to learn Photoshop. So this fella would come round to my house and he'd sit with me, and I'd just basically spend half a day going through Photoshop, you know, over the course of 3 separate days, teaching basically pretty much everything I know about Photoshop. And he would sort of sit there, take notes and practice in his own time. And I mean, again, I probably did this 15, 20 years ago. And then I had another student, again, probably about 10 years ago, a 9-year-old girl. She was really into like manga and anime, and that's sort of something I specialise in. So I was basically teaching her a few fundamentals of how to draw, you know, how to shade, things to think about, you know, when you're practicing drawing, you know, like using reference, life drawing, a little bit of digital. And I think we did about half a dozen sessions before that too came to an end. So I guess you could say there's a little bit of teaching, you know, like hands-on teaching, but I think teaching a 9-year-old girl, you know, from a well-off sort of background, you know, her mum and dad were pretty flush with cash, especially to be able to just, you know, their daughter's like, oh, I like manga, I like drawing manga. Okay, we'll find a manga artist to actually come to the house and teach you how to draw it. I mean, most people don't do that. Most people don't drop £50 a week on their kids' hobby, you know, like $80 or whatever, US. It's quite a lot of money to just allow your kid to, you know, have private tuition on something that they happen to be interested in. So yeah, 9-year-old girl, another, you know, older guy who's kind of interested in the topic of learning how to colour cartoons and comics using Photoshop. It's very different from teaching a bunch of prisoners in a classroom. So yeah, I turn up to the prison, very little experience, and I didn't know what to expect. I mean, it was hinted to me that I couldn't bring anything into the prison. I've never been to a prison before, a jail. And it was told, you know, obviously no explosives, no guns, no weapons, which was a shame because I was planning on bringing an AK-47 and a backpack full of C4 into the prison cells, but apparently I wasn't allowed to do that. So I couldn't do that. But equally, I also couldn't bring, you know, like paper clips and staples and loose sheets of paper. And I thought, well, how am I going to bring my notes, my CV, my little drawing exercise that we're going to do at the end of it without my sheets of paper? So I thought, well, I'm going to have to sort of in advance sort of revise my sort of questions that I wanted to ask during the interview, you know, the exercise that I'd be performing during the interview, but I wanted to have my notes as well. I brought the notes anyway just to see what would happen. So I went to the first sort of security bit, you know, I went to this little sort of reception area, handed in some ID, got a visitor's badge, went through several sort of doors, basically airlock type doors, to sort of get through to the next section, where I was then sort of meted and greeted from someone from the education sort of department within the prison. And then she then led me to where the education department actually was within the prison. I remember we just walked through like probably about 8 different doors, and every door you've got to basically put a key in, unlock it, lock it behind you, onto the next door, unlock it, lock it behind you. It was a prison, so good job they had a lot of security, but the whole environment felt very alien to me. You know, and you'd see prisoners wandering around the halls kind of looking at me kind of like they wanted to kill me, or just kind of sussing me out, sort of trying to look imposing or intimidating, and me trying not to overreact to it. But I'll be honest, it did intimidate me just being in that kind of environment, because I'm just thinking, I don't know what these people are going to do. And even if they don't do anything, it's just, I don't know, it's just weird when you've got people, you know, they're walking past you, you know, faces full of tattoos and stuff, and, you know, looking like, you know, bad dudes that are trying to sort of assert themselves and like sort of see who you are and how, you know, what they can get away with you and stuff. It had a certain vibe to it, just walking past these people, and, you know, sometimes they would make little comments and stuff. Anyway, it sort of put me on guard a little bit being in that kind of environment, and I just thought, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I mean, the whole way through, I kind of thought, I'm not sure if I want to do this. So anyway, got to the education department, sat down with these two ladies who were part of it, sort of admin, staff managers and stuff. And they were actually nice people. And I kind of thought, oh, you know what, I wouldn't mind working with, like in an environment with you two, because you seem quite switched on and, like quite professional and all this kind of stuff. And I just wondered, well, how do they deal with it? And I wondered, do men find it harder to work as staff within prisons compared to women? Like, my initial thought was that perhaps women would be allowed a few allowances when it came to like men working in prison. Obviously they're, if shit went down, if things kicked off, women would be less likely to sort of be able to defend themselves, especially if it was like in a classroom of 10 guys. What's a woman going to do? But equally, what's a man going to do? You've got 10 guys that decide to kick off. Like, basically, even if you're like an MMA fighter and you've got 10, thugs that basically want to beat the shit out of you, good luck trying to sort of defend 10 people, from ganging up on you at the same time, because, no one can do that. It's not we don't live in a Bruce Lee movie where everyone's going to wait for their turn to throw a few punches or whatever. So I was a bit concerned about the whole setup, and I wondered just how they were getting on. And yeah, we went through some interview questions, and I felt very rusty. I felt very off guard. Just the kind of formal questions and questions that I kind of knew I couldn't really answer. It was just stuff, it was a lot of like, what's your opinion on, diversity, equity and inclusion within the sort of prison system, and, how would you handle different types of prisoners and, with different needs and all this kind of stuff. And half the questions I kind of thought, well, you know what, I came here hoping that if I was ever to do this job, that you would tell me what I could do. I'd hope that you could tell me how much authority I would have in dealing with people. You would tell me what I'm likely to expect from people with different, abilities, and if it's like mental health issues, you would tell me, oh, you're like it. I would hope that if I'm running a class, I've got 10 people in it, that I would get a little bit of a briefing of what they were about. If someone's highly autistic, for example, I would hope that I would know that I have a highly autistic person in my classroom, and then I could, know how to cater for that. Maybe that's, I kind of felt like I ended up turning the questions around a lot on the interviewers, and just saying, well, I was hoping you would tell me how this runs. I was hoping you would tell me how this prison system runs, because the application, the job description, it wasn't very forthcoming with information. And I wondered if that was a deliberate ploy to knock people off. You just think, oh, they're keeping it quite general. It's all very much, oh, would you like a fulfilling role? Rehabilitating people back into the wider society, and it's a rewarding career, but it has its challenges. And it's like, well, what are the challenges? Like I say, would things ever kick off? What sort of boundaries would these people try to push? How would they push it? What authority do I have to push back against any of this kind of stuff? What sort of things would I even be teaching? It was quite confusing, because there was just so many unknowns, and it was quite hard to answer questions without enough kind of context within the role. And certain questions, like I say, I'm completely blind here. Most people are blind. Most people, even teachers, even if you have teaching experience, you don't know what it's like to work within a prison environment, and the restrictions that you'd have there, and the considerations you'd need to make towards the inmates in order to flourish. Surely you would get training for that. And I asked them, would you get training for all this kind of stuff? They're like, oh yeah, you'd get loads of training, you'd do like job shadowing, and you'd find out how it all works. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if I did that, if I saw, what other people within the classroom are doing and how they're dealing with certain issues, then that's how I would learn. I don't know, it just seemed, maybe I'm being a bit defiant or a bit stubborn, but it just felt like I was being asked, questions of how I would deal with certain situations without knowing what their policy was for how I should deal with certain situations. I mean, I suppose there's sort of some general, some general common sense stuff you can talk about, which I did, mention, like what would you do if two inmates were arguing with each other and having disagreements and fighting, and, how would you settle disagreements? And you can, you basically would say, which I did, is like you talk to them in a calm voice, you wouldn't raise your voice, you wouldn't, you give them time to explain their problems, you'd separate them, you give them opportunity to air grievances, in a sort of calm manner or whatever. So I don't know, and I was just thinking some of these questions, it's like, am I giving the right sort of answer, am I not? It's funny with interviews, because I think a lot of the time the interviewer doesn't want to give anything away. They don't necessarily want to tell you whether that's a good answer or a bad answer, so they will just ask you a question, quite a formal sort of question. You'll give quite a formal answer, and then it'll be a bit silent, a bit deadpan, no sort of acknowledgement of what you're saying, or no sort of prompting to help you to answer in a way that necessarily they want. There were a few times when they would elaborate and say, well, what we mean by that, like certain terms like safeguarding, what safeguarding measures would you put in place within a classroom? The term safeguarding has probably never entered my day-to-day vocabulary during my entire lifetime. Safeguarding isn't like a term that ever gets voiced outside of teacher training or just working with perhaps vulnerable people or something like that, or any kind of, any training where you're sort of public facing. For me, being like a behind the scenes type graphic designer and artist, I don't know, I'm used to just sitting in a little room, maybe a little office somewhere, just like I say, pushing pixels around the screen and problem solving. I don't really consider this. I don't really know what safeguarding means, So when you're basically being asked how would you deal with a problem, and you're like, I don't even know the definitions of the words you're talking about. It just makes you feel a bit unprepared, a bit stupid. Like I'm talking about the problems here. There were some questions where they wanted to know certain answers, and I felt like I gave some really good on-point answers, and I could see a few sort of head nods, of acknowledgement there. And I think after all was said and done, the interview questions for my prison art job, I kind of feel like I did an okay job. I think some of them I answered really well, others I struggled with a little bit. I think they could tell I was quite nervous. There was times when my mouth was just going really dry. Luckily, the usher that sort of brought me into the learning department within the prison, she said, do you want a drink? And I said, yes, water, please, because I thought I'm going to need this because my mouth is like cotton wool right now. And I don't know whether you ever get it when you're nervous. You have this kind of like swell in your throat where you start to talk, you can't get it out, and and you just sort of, it's almost like your throat just swells up and you can't get your words out, or you sort of choke on your own words. And I was getting that a little bit, but I tried to come across as confident as I could, and they say with people who are neurodivergent but who are able to quote unquote act normally, they learn to mask, they put on a mask and then they become who society says they need to be. And, we all do that to some degree. And I feel like I was masking as best I could in the short burst that I did the interview. And after that was all done, had a little tour of the building. And I kind of thought, like, it's weird because, I'm more of an illustrator, a character illustrator. I'm more into game art, comics, illustration, advertising, graphic design, and it seemed to me like they wanted a general art teacher. The person who was teaching art before was one of the interviewers. She was sort of actually one of the managers who was just kind of doing it because it was a job that needed doing, kind of thing. So I think she said she had a degree in art history, perhaps not a teaching degree, and perhaps no actual artistic experience as an actual artist who, you know, understands perspective, anatomy, colour theory, stuff like this. And it's just kind of the way, isn't it? Like, I've known a few teachers in my life who, you know, you ask them, well, what do you do? And they say, oh, I'm a music teacher. And I'm like, oh, so do you know about, you know, music theory, and or are you more sort of technical and you understand sort of instruments and amps and, you know, I don't know, but musical related things, you know, within a music production studio, you know, how to balance sounds and equalize sounds as pitches and the rest of it. And you ask them these kind of questions and they're like, no, I just did it because they needed someone to do it. And I'm like, what, you don't even play an instrument? And they're like, no, I don't play an instrument, I'm not musical in any way, but I teach it. How do you do that? And a lot of teachers, what they do is they literally just go to somewhere where they get a resource, understand the resource, and then just relay the information. And when I think about like both like when I went to university and when I went to school, that seems to be for the most part what education was. I mean, there is an art to it, and I had good teachers and bad teachers, but certainly, you know, there are times where you have like the supply teacher. It's like they don't necessarily know the subject, they just know how to, you know, relay information. And I remember just being at school, and I remember, all those times when sometimes the lesson was literally just the teacher reading out of a textbook, and then you had to just write it. So the teacher would just literally read off, 10 paragraphs from a textbook, and you would just write it in your exercise book, and that was the lesson. And I think, you know what, being a teacher, it's not even about understanding the subject necessarily. Specifically, as an adult, I became a little bit more interested in science, and I remember some of the things my old science teacher used to say back at school when I was like 15 years old. And I remember just thinking now, looking back, he was actually wrong about certain things. There were certain things to do with, physics or whatever that I've since gone on to learn myself just because I have a passing interest in it, which, you know, he was saying verbatim like he knew the answer. Maybe he thought he did know the answer, but he didn't. Teachers don't know everything, and it's just a weird thing when you sort of feel like I feel like, do they need me? Do they need an actual person with experience as an artist to teach criminals how to paint? It's such a weird job, isn't it, really? I mean, on a personal level, like I'm a bit torn about it. It's like, because I know statistically that people that do educational programs within prisons have like a 15 or 30% less chance of reoffending once they get out of prison. So, you know, there's data to back up that it's something worth doing. But at the same time, it's like, why aren't I in a position where I'm going into an actual university where kids genuinely want to learn the skills and the stuff that I'm actually genuinely good at, specifically the digital side of things, you know, digital art, that's my specialty. Or certainly, like I say, characters, comics, illustration, cartoons, you know, that's what I do, that's what I could actually teach on a level where it would make a difference. And I just think, would I ever want to actually teach, you know, convicted felons how to, you know, create artwork? I don't know, but yeah, certainly the thought of it was just confusing. Like, anyway, you know, I went through the interview, I got through it. It was very challenging, and after I walked out the building, you know, I sort of got to my car, I felt underneath my armpits and they were all like sweaty and stuff. Like, I'd never sweat so much in my life. Like, I was wearing a suit, which I again, outside of funerals, I haven't worn a suit since probably like my last job interview 15 years ago. And, you know, I was looking at my armpits, I was like amazed at just how much sweat had just bled from like my armpits, like halfway down my arm at that point. And it just sort of proved just how nervous I was without perhaps like even almost really realising it. There was just a part of me that just tried to sort of put myself elsewhere and just answer the questions. But yeah, it was crazy times, and I thought, well, I'm going to be given a yes or a no, or maybe just not. If I don't get a yes, maybe just nothing at the end of this week potentially. But I think if they were to give me the job, like I don't think I would give me the job. Like I don't know whether they would see through how just unconfident I was, and maybe I came across a lot more confident than I actually was, which was good, I guess, if I did feign it to some degree. But if they knew just what I really thought and how I really felt and how nervous I was of being in that environment, I wouldn't give me the job. And also, like I say, some of my answers were a bit unprepared. I didn't really have an answer for, what safeguarding measures would I put in place within a classroom. I did blag a few things, but I felt like it would have been good if I had like pre-prepared answers and had thought about it a little bit more before I went ahead and did the interview. Like I had thought of certain questions that they might ask me in advance, but they didn't ask those questions. So I didn't get to use the answers that I had kind of rehearsed in my mind. But yeah, I just thought, yeah, if I was them, I probably wouldn't give me the job. And if they did give me the job, I think, to be honest, I don't think I'd accept it. I mean, it was good that I prepared for it as though it was a genuine job that I genuinely wanted. And good that I had the experience of actually I actually got an interview, which isn't easy because I've applied for like 40 jobs this year. And, being generally more like creative, artistic-y types of jobs, they don't come about very often. So, every time I'm tailoring my applications and my CV, I'm not just reeling out CVs to whoever's advertising just in the hope of getting any kind of job. But yeah, that was the role. It was. They said it as well. Do you have any expectations of salary? And I always think, well, what do you say for that? Because within the job description, they said that the salary would be £38,000. Americans out there, that's probably about $47,000, which probably sounds really low for an American standard. But given the fact that we don't have to pay extra for healthcare and stuff like that over here, it's an okay salary, I guess. And it would be, if I did do it, it would be the biggest salary I've ever had. When I was running my art business, selling artwork, taking on commissions, tattooing, I would earn like 13,000 a year on average. So I'm used to being poor. I'm used to not earning a lot of money. And the part-time pizza delivery job I've got at the moment, again, it's a minimum wage job. If I only work 10 hours, or 15 hours in a week, I'm earning 150 pounds a week. It's just ridiculous. It's almost pointless even doing it. But it's just trying to make up the penny. So it would be nice to actually have enough money to actually be able to kind of do something with. But I just don't know if I could do that sort of job, just given the fact that I'm so fucking neurotic, basically. There's a part of me that just, like, if I didn't have this neuroticism and I just had a bit more courage and the balls to just do it, then I might be okay. But I'm just, like I say, very stress sensitive, very introvert, and just being in a classroom with just a bunch of people who, from my limited interactions with those types of people, it's like, I just thought I just wouldn't be able to handle it. So that was that. A week later, so a couple of days ago now, well, a day ago, yesterday, I had another job interview, and this was a Zoom call, online interview for a local council, or not council, but it's more like a charity. Without going into the details, it was basically to do graphic design and social media management jobs. So creating graphics and content that would be uploaded to social media channels, coming up with a plan, like little campaigns that I would post and monitor in order to increase engagement on social media, and other design related jobs, like sprucing up the website, creating flyers and posters, and perhaps email marketing campaigns, that kind of stuff. It was all stuff which, as part of my current business that I do, the art and design business, it's like, yeah, I do this every day. Like, I'm totally experienced in it. I don't have an issue. And anyway, we did this call. There were 3 people interviewing me. Again, very nervous about doing the whole interview thing. Weird as well that it was a Zoom call. I don't do Zoom calls very often, but I've had a little bit of experience with calls and stuff, I guess. And yeah, I just thought that interview, I didn't, unlike the prison interview, working in the prison, I didn't feel like I had some good interviewers. They didn't seem very experienced in interviewing, and the questions that they asked me were very formulaic. It was very much, they would read a question. They wanted a very much like backwards and forwards. I'll ask you this, you respond like this. I'll ask you that, you respond with another thing. And then they would just read off, it was like a textbook. Can you give me an example of a thing in the workplace where you did X? And, I guess, who am I to be critical and stubborn of how people want to interview people? But I just thought, I could tell you that, but if you read my CV or even looked at my portfolio that I sent along with my CV, you would have seen loads of examples about what you want, what you might want. But now you're asking for just one general example to sort of sell myself within this interview. I thought it was a bit weird. And again, it was a lot of the questions of how would you approach, how would you communicate to people within our industry, within our sector? What differences would you make if you were communicating with our customers compared to other customers? And I gave an answer, but at the same time I kind of thought, isn't it up to you to tell me how you want me to do this? I'm not saying I want to be handheld with any of this, but I need to know your policies, your principles, if there are any rules and regulations specific to this job. I'm not asking for a lot of training, maybe an hour worth of sort of just general training. So I'm like, right, gotcha. Okay, now I get it. Because it was only towards the last sort of 10 minutes of this sort of 45-minute interview that we had where I was given the opportunity to ask them questions. And it was great because we got off the sort of formulaic A, B question answer thing, and we started talking as though, or kind of how I talk with my clients, on a freelance basis, where, I listen to their actual problem and then I offer a solution. And maybe that's just because of what I'm used to, but I could tell both of us were getting so much out of this, both the interviewer and interviewers, and me, the interviewee, because it's like, right, once I started asking questions about exactly what they wanted, and what, I started to realise, right, okay, good, I got it. So actually, turns out you've got like multiple audiences that you need to cater for here. So you're going to need like multiple strategies. And so what we would do to start with is we would do this. And I could just tell, I started like smashing it out the park as soon as we could start talking like normal human beings and like collaborating in a way where they would really start talking about what they actually wanted and then I could start talking exactly how I would go about solving all their problems. And I just thought, why couldn't we have started with this? Because again, it was one of these things where they launch, both interviews, they sort of launch into the Q&A. And I just think, should we maybe talk about, like, lay some groundwork for this? Because a lot of these job descriptions, you find them on sites like Indeed, and it's just like, we're looking for a motivated, hardworking, enthusiastic, graphic designer or an artist to work as part of our team. Someone that wants a challenging yet rewarding career. And it's just like, okay, but what do you actually want? What specific like jobs do you want me to do within your company, organization, whatever? Like, because what I want to know is what it looks like on a daily basis, what the job looks like, what duties do I need to perform? What do you actually want to measure? What's your idea of measuring what you need to measure? Like, yeah, I mean, like I say, I don't know anything about interviews. These are the first few interviews I've done in a while, so I'm really out of practice. But I don't know, maybe it's like through a massive lack of confidence, but I get really shaken up or really like flustered when I'm asked a question that I haven't had time to prepare for. And sometimes because they're like pre-written, if we end up going off on a tangent, we're stuck with these pre-written questions. So for example, the second Zoom call interview, it kind of turned out that they didn't really know what they wanted. These were predominantly older people that didn't really understand the internet, didn't really understand the digital marketing space, something that I did know more about. And they didn't really fully communicate, or I didn't find out until towards the end that this needed to be more of a collaborative process between the pair of us, sort of figuring out even what the job would be. And, they knew that they wanted to promote, digital market their organization, but they didn't really know how to go about it or what going about it looked like. So we ended up just going through these A/B questions that weren't really relative or relevant to the job itself. And I just remember one question being like, give an example of some design work that you've done in Canva. For anyone that doesn't know, Canva is basically like it's a template website where you log on, you can change the writing on a templated flyer or web page or whatever it is, and then just it's like customizing existing graphics basically. Now the way I work, I tend to create graphics from the ground up using like Photoshop, or if I'm producing a layout, it'll be done with InDesign. I literally build everything from the basic building blocks. So I'm not really a template person. I understand if you're not very skilled, or you're just a home user, or a small business that doesn't have the resources to employ a specific designer or design team, then that's something that you'll generally turn to. And there's nothing wrong with Canva. I mean, I'm sure I could use it myself in order to just save myself time if I need to produce some quick sort of promotional material, and we don't need to worry about establishing a brand and keeping consistency within that brand over the various marketing materials that we end up producing. It's like, it was too late. It's like, well, look, you keep going on about Canva. I don't use Canva. I can do, but I don't know if you know that because I know the Adobe suite on an expert level. I don't know whether you realise that Canva is like 1% of my knowledge. It's like, well, we really want to. I mean, for example, I would be so disappointed if I didn't get this job, and if I asked them why, if they said to me the equivalent of, well, because you didn't know how to use, I'm trying to think, like Windows 3.1, the operating system that existed on PCs back in 1992, because you didn't know that, I'm afraid we can't give you the job, because our computers are so out of date that is what we use, and you don't know how to do that. And I'd just be thinking, well, I do know how to do that, or I could learn it pretty easily. It's like, it's just I don't do stuff like that because I'm a little bit more ahead of that, and generally people would want custom products, and that's typically what I work with. I think I probably just sound really defiant and really negative and complaining and stuff. And at the end of the day, both these jobs, the prison job, let's be honest, I'm not suited for it. I'm too much of an anxious type of person, and I'm glad I did the interview for experience sake, but I don't think I could handle it. I really don't. And the second job, But that paid really bad. That paid minimum wage. It paid the same as what I'm earning to deliver pizzas, basically. And even though I have the ability and skill to work as a design consultant, someone who, maybe not now because the whole art and design landscape has changed, and this is the whole reason why I'm trying to actually get a job and I can't just rely on my own endeavours anymore. But it's the sort of job which 5-10 years ago I could happily been charging, £100 an hour, and now I'm having to sort of basically charge £12 an hour because there's just so much supply for art and design jobs and so little demand, basically, because everyone now is just either using AI or they have Canva. They have the ability to have one of their staff just, repurpose templates all day long, and the design space has really dried up for a lot of graphic designers and artists and stuff these days. So yeah, times are changing, and it's difficult times, and I guess I feel glad that I've now got a couple of interviews under my belt. If I don't get the jobs, I'll be the prison one, be happy with that. If they said sorry, I'd be like, no problem. If you said yes, I was going to say I don't want it anyway. And the other job, what do I do? Do I have the sort of perhaps lower responsibility pizza delivery job, but is a bit like mind numbing and comes with its own set of problems? For example, like an authoritarian manager who likes to micromanage me, is never content with anything I do, is always looking for something to complain about, is just a bit of a bane to me just doing the job. Do I continue to deal with that while doing the pizza deliveries? Plus it being in a really rough area where I've explained on a previous video, it's like, is my car going to get vandalised, just driving out of the pizza delivery car park at some point? I don't know. But do I continue with that job, or do I just swap it out for the same pay but doing something more in my wheelhouse, something that I'm a bit more familiar in, but that because it's it's more thinky, it's more cerebral, it's like, do I want that extra responsibility and stress? I don't know. So anyway, that's just some stuff that's been going on for me. Job interviews, the search I guess will continue. For now, I'm just going to take I think maybe a couple of weeks from like applying for jobs and doing interviews and stuff. I mean, I've applied for a couple of other jobs in the last couple of weeks, which I could potentially get interviews for. So this might not be the end of it, but I'm gonna just wait and see what happens. I've got, I can't have I did a pizza shift today. I'll do another pizza delivery shift tomorrow and the next day, and I've got some artwork that I want to work on. Because I'm supposed to still be an artist. I still define myself as an artist, so it would be good to actually create some art at some point. But I don't know, I get so stressed at the minute. It makes me tired. It makes me really tired just dealing with so much stuff that's stressing me out. Like, there's this idea of just being productive and being motivated to keep doing things, but when you're just dealing with even something like a 1 hour long interview, it's so, like, the build up to it is so stressful, and then once it's done, it's like you just want to sleep afterwards. So I'm struggling, but I'm going to be relentless despite all of that and continue the best I can, and hopefully I'll have more updates in the future so far as my career plans goes, and I guess I'll speak to you about it more then. Thanks for sticking around.